Rocky Top ain't no telephone bill. Once I had a girl on Rocky Top and 30
you haven't been to deer camp, yeah, I'll just stop there. I would just say you probably need to come check that out because it's a big part of this. It takes what we're doing here and it goes into experience. It actually, faith becomes real, community and connection. The cure for what ails every one of us, it is connection. And you have a place to go and experience that. So let me introduce Jim Cress. Jim, there's some issues. Jim is actually from Tennessee. He and Phil, they probably are related because they're from Tennessee. Just is what it is. Jim has just an interesting background. Jim was the radio voice for June Hunt Ministries. Worked with her for many years, and then he was he hosted the Minrith Meyer Clinic radio broadcast, which is now New Life Live with Steve Arterburn. But Jim, I think, knows everybody in Christendom just through his background and his ministry. Jim's training, he went to Dallas Seminary, and then he did his counseling work at Colorado Christian. Jim is married to Jessica, and they have 3 children and 1 grandchildren. And I was told if I did not mention that grandchild, I was in big trouble. I didn't see pictures of anybody else but him. Yeah. So he's pretty proud of that grandbaby. Jim, I will ask you to come up and, tell us what's on your heart.
Can you tell me how much time I have to? Quarter to.
It has been said that Jim has a face for radio. Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, Jim Cress.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. It is great being back with you guys. Eli and I love coming here. I've said to Ron, thank you, sir. I just don't know of another place like this that has this much of consortium of men or a gathering of men. So it's an honor to stand here. I'm a regular guy like you, and just to have a talk today and see if something I think God's laid on my heart, put in my mind at least, that might be helpful for you. Rome was talking about, obviously you guys have established deer camp here and then fish camp, and Eli's doing the Kentucky camp. I think is there a doe camp? Sort of. Well, see, I want to start something like this. I've told Rome that, and will eventually at some level in North Carolina, doing something just with men. My wife hears the idea of that, and she started one before I could for women where we live. And the name of her camp is I Don't Like to Camp. So I said, fine. Took her camping one time like an idiot, and she was like 8 months pregnant, and that's not a lie. And we're in there, hot. I grew up camping we didn't do it in friggin' tents. We were out in the, out sleeping out under the stars, sleeping bags, and so that, and literally we've been married 34 years. That's the only time that she's ever camped, and I doubt she'll go back. She'll take a good hotel, and she says, like, what do they call that? Glamping, the glamour camping. So I get it. We as men are wired to forget. We really are. And if we may say that amongst a group of Christian men, as believers, as Christians, our flesh, we are wired to forget. And that's why God has made it clear early on that he's calling us to remember. And we'll see that. I'm going to look for just a moment into Genesis and get an idea, just an overview of where this whole thing started. I'm always mindful of Romans 5:12, wherefore as by one man, Adam, sin entered the world, and so death by sin, death passed upon all men for all of sin. So it started, who's your daddy, right? Your daddy is Adam. And newsflash, if you and I had been standing there in the garden, our hands and feet and face and every part of our body would be covered by fruit. If you ever have the idea, that idiot Adam, I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have taken the fruit. Yeah, you would have, and so would I. And I'm going to start here just for a moment in Genesis 2. We are called, it's so interesting, we're called to rule and subdue our world. That has not changed. So what is the world, your world, interior world, exterior world, cutting your grass, right? We are called as men to rule and subdue our world. And God says in Genesis 2, not only are we to rule and subdue our world, I love this. He said to Adam, you get to name everything in your world. That is still applicable today when God has called us to name our world. As men, we are to look into the darkness around us and around our homes and our family and our internal life, and we're to speak into the darkness. We are to look at the chaos of life, and we are to speak into the chaos, and then implied in Genesis is to move into the chaos. Now, since you had the naked picture of David up here before, I certainly can go here. Because some guys go, oh, dude, this is creepy. It's not. God left every man in this room a metaphor that what you are to do with your wife, as you see David there, and it implies from Genesis that we were once naked and unashamed. The ultimate camp, right? Just walking around the Garden of Eden, fellowshipping with God. And as we are there, God reminds us in our very anatomy, listen, you do this with your wife. I guess if you've been sexual, if you're single, you will or already have. A man is to listen, swell up with power, penetrate his wife, and pour life into her. You understand how sex works? That is what God in the body left us as a reminder as a man to do to our world. We're not talking about sex now. We're just saying the anatomy of our very body is a man is to swell up with power, penetrate his world, wherever your world is, and pour life. Not be a life taker, but a life giver. Isn't that amazing? God put that right in our own anatomy. He says, you name the animals, name everything there. I wonder what that was. You're going down the line, you got all these different names, giraffe, billy goat, yak, some of these names. Who comes up with these names? And what we find if we go to today, but it's as old as the Bible, is something gets flipped, and no longer are we naming our world, no longer are we ruling and subduing our world. We are allowing the world to name us, and we are being ruled in a full Nelson, pinned down, and we are being subdued by the world around us. Flips that, doesn't it? Right on its head. You know what? I know it's corny, right? Today's the first day of the rest of your life. It can be to say, I'm going to get back to that original design and look around, wake up, drink some coffee, do something, look around and say, where is my world and what do I need to rule and subdue and what do I need to name? I was at age 4 named pervert, named sexual abuse victim. Some of you have that in your story. Some of you may not. When the older boys around said, perform this sexual act on the older boy. I was 4. They were much older. And, that was the entrance into the tribe. That's what I thought I was supposed to do. What does that set up? Or beaten with a belt. Some of you remember Dad pulling the belt off, one of you old timers, and it hitting every loop of that belt. Some of you, maybe there was you were named that you're not worth anything unless you're a sports star, like a real sports star, or make all good grades or whatever it is. The world is always active. Our past is always active to name us. Some of you today, we could go around and say, what are some of the names that you've had? Even if just implied. Anybody willing to call one out, especially from years ago, from childhood? Whether you were literally named or you felt that message and you said, that's the name I received. And I'm looking for some of the negative ones. Anybody willing to share one? A name that you felt was implied that you were called? Anybody? Because nobody got out clean. Everybody got named. What's a name? Weak. Disobedient. Second. Others? Life names us. That's a district one. Yeah. I know that. That's Tennessee. So, yeah. Anybody else? How did life name you? Did somebody say one? Deplorable. Not good enough. Alone. Loser. Good. The choir worked this morning. I like that. And when Rowan says alone, you know, the great philosopher Blaise Pascal said, this is very, very important. He said, well, what do we struggle with as men? He distilled it down to this. He said, all. That means he believed all. All of men's problems stem from the inability to sit alone with himself quietly in a room. Because you're left with yourself there, right? And maybe you take some of those old names and you name yourself. So again, I would identify some of those names, and a one-to-one correlation, I would look at trying to find true names, new names. We'll look at a couple from Scripture that you can rename yourself. You stupid idiot, you dummy, that internal self-talk, okay? That you learn to answer those names and say that is not true and correct that. Dr. John Gottman is the lead marital researcher that we all bow to because he's got the research on everything on marriage. And he says basically it takes about 3 to 5 full tilt affirmations to cover one crappy thought, whether your spouse says it to you, somebody else says it to you. No wonder we're in trouble in marriages. So the idea of if those negative thoughts come to you, answer them. How do we do that practically? Martin Luther, the great reformer, said, I cannot keep the birds from flying over my head. The name's coming, but I can keep them from making a nest in my hair. And to say, I refuse that thought, one of my lines I use. Correct the thought. 2 Corinthians 10:5. Take every thought captive and make it obedient to Christ. I share that with clients, and they have kind of a nice hotel mentality or a real hospitality mentality of taking every thought captive. What they need, and biblically this is accurate, is an ISIS mentality. When that verse says you take every thought captive, ISIS doesn't come in and say, y'all, we got Chick-fil-A and we got donuts and we're going to sit there. Everybody's got a nice memory foam bed and you can take that home with you. Now we're taking you captive. That's not how ISIS works. So if you take every thought captive, it implies violence, not against yourself, but against the thought. And to stand up and say, I refuse that thought and correct it, because our thoughts can name us as well. I want to move to Genesis 2:25. And again, you got David again one more time. So there was man and wife. They were naked and unashamed. That's about as good as it's going to get, probably in my view, till heaven. There they were, naked and unashamed. It's like a Broadway play. The curtain falls on Genesis 2, and here comes the curtain up in Genesis 3. And immediately, you know what happens there. Their eyes are opened, and they are naked and ashamed. And we've been there ever since. And listen how practical. The resources that he had God, Adam and Eve had God. So when they realize they're naked and ashamed, and I understand many of you know these passages, we're just revisiting them. They grab fig leaves to cover their inadequacies and then go over and hide, jump in the bushes and hide and try to see that they could hide from Adam, hiding from himself, Eve hiding from herself, both hiding from each other, and then hiding from God, like that would work. And so I would open this up today, but I'm going to move just in time because I love to ask groups of men, would you be so honest to talk about your fig leaves? Many men walk around, and women too, and say, you don't understand, Jim, this is my personality. No, that's not true, actually. You were born with a personality. It does get developed, but you develop what we call, it's a whole different term, a style of relating. That is a fig leaf. There's a place for humor. You can be sanguine or whatever number. I'm a 7 on the Enneagram. If you do Enneagram, you go right down the line, but it's a style of relating that I can use the humor to hide. I feel anxiety, walk in the room, crack a joke, and I'm using that as a fig leaf, or being successful in my career. If you want to do something that's really, it's very insightful, is just kind of imagine someday, sometimes I've taped these over a guy's chest with 3x5 cards to write down what are your fig leaves? How do you hide? And then don't condemn yourself. Just kind of go, yep, Roan, I'm in my gig. I know I'm hiding there. There's no condemnation in this. It's just to go, this isn't my personality. I'm the talker. Or my favorite is, I'm the hugger. And I go, no, you're not. You're the huggy. You're stealing hits of oxytocin by coming and giving me a hug. Don't say I'm a hugger. You're a huggy. Very, very simple. It's not personality. It's a style of relating. It's based in fig leaves on how we dress ourselves. I think it's interesting to contrast the fig leaves, and who could blame them? Because every one of us would have been, I don't know what I'd have been doing. I'd probably been grabbing who knows what to cover myself back then. Every one of us have done it. We'll still do it. The fig leaves is a fake armor to protect us. You're never going to let me see you sweat, the old deodorant commercial. You're not going to see me sweat. So the fig leaves are fake armor. Contrast that with Ephesians 6, the armor of God. So if you're going to take off the fig leaves, you better have something else to put on. And it's very mindful to say, how do I dress in the armor of God? And this is not an armor that's just to keep you away. Remember, it's really to protect and keep what boundaries. If you have boundaries, are to keep you safe, all the good stuff in. It's not to try to manage other people. So how are you dressed every day in fig leaves, the old fig leaves that are there, in your own power or in the armor of God? And you can look about that in Ephesians chapter 6. I love this thing God says as they're hiding. And sometimes to be like, God, that's the dumbest question. Why do you ask these rhetorical questions? God says, Adam, where are you? And why I love that question is, I think every day and I think every moment of the day, God is looking at old Jimbo up here and saying, where are you, buddy? Where are you? Where are you right now? I don't think he's that interested in geography, but he's interested in what I call the geography of my soul. Where are you? Are you in your gig? You in fig leaves? I struggle with anxiety. Okay? And with anxiety, it can be, are you trusting me? Are you worried? I know when I'm in anxiety, I've left the moment, right? Because anxiety is always future-based. It can be somewhat past-based, but it's like, what's coming up next? What's coming up next? What's coming up next? And Jesus in my faith says, I live with you right here in the here and now in the moment. I know that because he's outside the time-space continuum. I call it living in the eternal now. It's even bigger than the now. It's the eternal now. And he says, return, just come, stand right here with me. Don't worry about tomorrow. I'm with you. I'll take care of it. So that idea of God saying, where are you now? Know your red dot. You go to a mall or the old roadside directory, the red dot says you are here. To know where you really are and say, I'm sad, depressed. I'm on the verge of looking at porn again. I'm on the verge of just hating my wife. Brene Brown, the great researcher and author that some of us have trained under and use her program, she says, when you're relating to another person, I add to it, if you're relating to yourself and God, so 3 ways. When I'm relating to myself, God, or another person, there's only 2 ways you can be. You can either be in empathy. That means I try to connect and understand. It doesn't mean I know everything you feel. You're either in empathy or you're in judgment. And if you judge someone else, what did the teacher tell us, old timers? If you point your finger at someone else, you got what? 3 pointing back and 1 pointing to God. You better examine how you've judged God. Job did it, the patience of Job. Read the end of the book. He said, I've had enough of this. Okay? Where are you? That's a daily reminder several times a day to say, where am I right now? What's going on inside? So God comes along with Adam, and I believe that this is my belief. I wouldn't go die on the hill for this, but that the first sin was unbelief. It's interesting in Hebrew when Satan says to Eve, you'll read it says, surely God hath not said. That's not what it says in Hebrew when Satan begins to speak against God's truth. It says, you shall she said, if we eat this, God says, you'll surely die. In Hebrew, it's, you shall surely die, not, is exactly how it's framed. So he literally quotes, he's saying the same thing. Satan says, you shall surely die, not. The artistry of Satan to be able just to corrupt, you're saying the same thing. And then Eve obviously blames the serpent, and how powerful, and I've done this so many times myself. You come along, God says, well, Adam, this is me and you, mano a mano, just like you did with Job. Remember Job, when Job was pissed? Stand up like a man. I don't think that's condemnation. I think, gird your loins. I need a man here. I want to talk with you, God says. He honored him. Stand up like a man. We're going to talk. And he says, Adam, what up, dude? What happened? It's that woman that you gave me. And he blamed a woman and he blamed God. And that's a core struggle for us as guys. So I think there's an unbelief. In the Hebrew, it implies that Adam stood right there beside Eve the entire time with his teeth in his mouth and his elbows halfway up his arm, just frozen. He had several exits to stop and say no. That, remember, he was told to rule and subdue the garden. He froze. And then after he froze, maybe it happens with some guys. I see it, and we've all seen it with porn or affairs or things of saying, well, I wasn't getting enough, you know what, at home, or my wife was cold to me, and then I went over here. And blaming people, again, back to Brene Brown, if you blame somebody, it's an attempt to discharge pain and discomfort. It is an attempt to discharge pain and discomfort when you blame. It's that woman you gave me. And that started it all. We've been blaming everybody else since. So God comes along after that. He didn't accept that now. Didn't accept that then. He doesn't accept it now. If you go to Hebrews 9:27, it's appointed unto a man once to die and after the judgment. Start every day at the judgment seat of Christ. That's not a bad place to start. And then work your way backwards. Yeah, but Roan did, and he pissed me off, and you did, and my wife, and I'm not getting, is to stop, and he would say, where are you? Where are you? And you say, God, this is my stuff. And God is so merciful and compassionate. I'm angry, God. I'm upset. This doesn't feel right. There's an atrocity in the world. I have a niece right now on a ventilator from addiction. I performed a wedding ceremony for her and her husband. And the family's tried everything they could to save her. And doesn't look good. And Lord, I'm begging you, give me one more chance. I'll go up, typical pastor, counselor. And then Jesus, she's in your hands. But why? Or somebody's gotten cancer. Eugene Peterson, some of you read the message. He's in hospice care. I love Eugene Peterson. It's like, oh, why God? So God gives us a word in Hebrew. If you have that Zakar quote, many of you deer campers, you know the quote, so it's nothing new. And he gives us a word when we are forgetting. First two sins, unbelief. The second is passivity, I believe. Forgetting. And Zakar is the remembering one, or he who remembers. I get to work with Jewish clients, like Orthodox Jewish clients, and they'll say, tell me about Zakar. Oh, Zakar, how would you know that, Jim? I said, well, I went to cemetery. I learned a few things. I said, yeah, to remember. They still know. So God puts a word for man in Genesis saying, I want to name you Zakar, he who remembers. We are wired to forget. We have to choose to remember. Fast forward that to communion. Isn't it interesting? Not the glory of the resurrection in heaven, but my trauma. Body broken, blood shed. Join me, men. This do in remembrance of me. Remember. I want to play a quick clip from The Lion King, if you have that. You'll see Rafiki, who is like the counselor, the minister. He's coming, the monkey, and to tell to Simba, who's lost his way, and this has got Zakar written all over it, that we are called to remember who we really are. Let's watch this.
Look down there. That's not my father. It's just my reflection. No. Look hard. You see, he lives in you. Father?
Simba, you have forgotten me.
No. How could I?
You have forgotten who you are, and so forgotten me. Look inside yourself, Simba. You are more than what you have become. You must take your place in the circle of life.
How can I go back? I'm not who I used to be.
Remember who you are. You are my son, and the one true king. Remember.
Please, don't leave me. Father! Don't leave me.
Gets the old lump in my throat. Hope it does for you. You've forgotten who you are. It's happened since Genesis. Not your fault there. Adam started it. But today, what are we called to remember? Just a couple of verses here. There are many to remind ourselves of who we are. The Bible tells us that yet to him who did receive him, you hear this in John's words, to them he gave the power to become the sons of God or the children of God. Ephesians tells us that God predestined us for adoption to sonship. We are sons. We have a Father who says, remember who you are. And the power of God in Christ and the Trinity and the living reality is that God lives in us. Christ is in us, the hope of glory. We don't have to feel the Father has left or abandoned us. Romans, accept one another just as Christ accepted you in order to bring praise to God. For in Christ all the fullness of the deity lives in bodily form, and in Christ you've been brought to fullness. Whoever is united with the Lord is united with him. The Bible tells us that we know that our old self was crucified with him, so that the body ruled by sin, whatever's ruling you by sin, whatever problem you have, lust, go down the line, anything else, fear, anxiety, any of that, we have more help in Christ and in the gospel than you have problem. That is not your bottom line. That body ruled by sin would be done away with, that we'll no longer be slaves to sin. And just, there are many, many more. I just love, because this is true in my view of it, of even non-Christians. Genesis tells us the imago Dei, the image of God. We were literally created in the image of God, so we bear the image of God. That is pretty powerful. James 1 tells us just briefly that a man goes, we see this as therapists, pastors see it on Sunday and other times, you see it at deer camp, that a man will go look into the mirror, God's mirror, and says, this is who you are. And in that moment, he says, I see. Not just who I am, truly, but how I struggle. I need to work on this. And then he walks away from the mirror and he forgets. See how it's just pervasive through Scripture? In the mirror, he sees it. We've all seen it that work with people, and you've seen it with friends or life coaching, and in yourself. You say, I do see it. I want to change this. And I walk away, and the haunting voice of Genesis is back, and he forgets. Theme verse of my ministry, Integrity Redeemed, is Psalm 26:11. David is writing. I like it because he starts with, as for me. He is not saying, as for the rest of you. I think it's true for the rest of you. He says, Psalm 26:11, but as for me, I shall walk in my integrity. That word means wholeness, not just I've got squeaky clean taxes but as for me, I shall walk in my integrity, goes vertical, redeem me. Notice, not restore me, reclaim me. He says redeem. God is a God about redeeming all the crap you've gone through. He likes to buy it back and redeem it. But as for me, I shall walk in my integrity, redeem me, and be gracious to me. That's what God offers you today. A couple of quotes, and we're going to wrap up. If you have one of those to put up. My dear friend, and if you ever heard of Larry Crabb, pray for him because his health is not doing well right now. He now lives in Charlotte, where I live. Larry Crabb says, and this is so loaded with prime rib, you can't get it all in one take. I wish you could take all day and meditate. Unless men listen, honestly face, now here's the line, their stubborn delight in forgetting. Heels dug in, stubborn, but I love. My wife told me last night on the phone, the accountant says you need to get back to their an email on something around our home and business. You gave him some passwords, they didn't work. And I literally was in bed after the end of the day, there at Roan's house, and I'm like, I said, babe, I'll do it tomorrow. I just can't even have this conversation right now. I was honest about it, but that was a little bit of a stubborn delight. I don't want to think about that now. You come home, your wife says, hey, so-and-so, the HVAC broke. I don't want to think about that now. Unless men honestly face their stubborn delight in forgetting and what their commitment to passions greater than their passion for God, change will never occur. outline sometimes your passions that are greater than your passions for God. If you put one metaphor, if you put in this hand God and the Bible, and you put in the other hand, fill in the blank, but one classic one is, in the other hand, pornography and masturbation. If you put in this hand God and the Bible, and the other hand, pornography and masturbation, and listen, and your insistence is, I will feel better now, God has no chance, neither does the Bible, to beat pornography and masturbation, because God, G-O-D, does not stand for God on demand. I want to feel better now. I said that's the kicker. If you're saying, I will feel better now, never happened. Unless men honestly face their stubborn delight in forgetting and their commitment to passions greater than their passion for God, change will never occur. And there's one more quote from Larry. I love this. Listen to choice. It wasn't like, I'll try it. I had chosen to open my eyes more and more to the terrible realities of living in this fallen world. And then, men, I realized I'd entered a battle of which there's no way out. That's not a bad news. It's to go, I'm in. You take the blindfolds off, you take the fig leaves off, you say, I'm going to daily step into battle, and you choose to do that, you'll realize there's no way out. One of the things counseling does, or discipleship does, is it wakes people up to, they go, I can't unsee what I've seen, right? My eyes are open. So a lot of people, I think, are afraid of going to counseling. I can't unsee what I see. So we end by encouraging you to daily ask yourself, where am I? Today, really, if you make that much more money, that names who you are, man, that's a prostitute. Don't let the world or your finances or success ultimately name who you are. If you've struggled with some kind of sin problem, I get it, and your wife puts off an energy like, I'll never respect you, I'll never forgive you, you pervert or something else. In her pain, she tries to name you. Not about you refuting that, it's just name yourself. Get around Phil or Roan or these guys and say, remind me who I am. Literally call a guy. Teach my guys in Charlotte. Call your guy in group and say, would you remind me who I am? That's why we need each other, right? I thank you guys, and I hope that, as Paul said, that maybe there's one or two things of this, that the things you've learned or seen or maybe heard here, you will go put into practice. Thank you.
Guys, we have a few more minutes left, and I want Jim and Eli, if you would come up. I'm going to ask one question, and as time allows, I want to invite you to ask a question as well. But Jim, the question that I would have, and I would ask you and Eli to kind of elaborate on this, is relative to the Genesis 2:25 passage. And Adam and Eve were naked and unashamed. What do you see is the issue of shame in our recovery, in our wholeness, in our growth? How do you see that as so cancerous to the process of growth and healing?
I'll go first. Okay. Yeah, just quickly. Shame is, I suck, I am bad. I mean, I'm bad. Guilt is, I've done something bad. In the addiction world that some of us are trained in, on sex addiction, we know that shame is the trap door. Shame, it always starts with shame that leads to acting out. If I can get guys to kill the shame, deal with the shame, disempower the shame, and have something to address that with, okay? Because shame is an attempted antidote to pain. If I can get them to address that, it gets so easy to deal with if it's pornography, sexual acting out, or whatever else. But if you're trying all these strategies and all these plans and not addressing the shame inside, that's what I see is harboring it. Shame, I use these little orange cones I've got. Shame is the runway for addiction to land on. Okay? And I believe one of the cures to shame is Psalm 8, is to breathe in. God says, no shame. Man, you are crowned with glory and honor. And see, you can't just say, well, I'm not ashamed. You got to correct it. Who are you? I'm a man crowned with glory and honor.
I think that when Jim was talking about earlier about the garden and what Adam did and believing the lie, I think shame is that energy behind the lie that Satan gives us all the lie. Jim asked you earlier at the beginning of the thing, what are some of the early messages? What are some of the early names? And he didn't hear mine. Mine was stupid. So it's like You know, it's like now that came on the heels of a learning disability, dyslexia, and so forth. So it's like, you know, my understanding of why I couldn't compete with you in school was because I was stupid. It wasn't had anything to do with learning disabilities. I bought into a lie. Shame is that energy that energizes us to go run into the bushes, and we do it in a lot of different ways. We don't want to show up with our wives. We don't want to be vulnerable. We don't want to be transparent because they'll see our nakedness, and they will believe of us like we do. And that is that's the energy that causes all of us not to be what Jim was talking about today, stand in our nakedness without shame. And I think what Jim says is exactly right. Shame energizes all of us to run to bushes. And we run to bushes a lot of ways. Sometimes it can be very religious. We can hide behind our religion. We can hide behind religious behaviors, and all the while, no one really sees the real us. So I want to end this part of my piece of this thing would be to challenge each of you that says, you know, if no one else in this world knows who you are, you've never been seen and known, have you really existed on this earth? Is there anyone that witnesses the true you? And I suspect, I'm not sure, I don't know much, but I suspect that maybe our spouses are in our world to witness the authentic person we are in the hands of a God full of grace and mercy that transforms us into that new man. Shame short circuits that process.
Take a couple more questions. We've got two.
Sure.
Questions?
Questions? See, here's a fig leaf. Jim, we'd like to ask you how you got so good looking.
Okay, Jim, I'd
See,
like to ask
no,
you how
see-
you got so good looking.
Thank you. Pregnant pause. I'm a 35-year broadcaster. You don't want dead air, right? And I'm going, well, crack a joke. You say, oh, you're just being funny. But that's truly, I mean, the idea of thinking, my brain's going, all right, pause, you know, anathema for a radio broadcaster. So there's a great way to put that in, even though I did it by choice. Is there a question about any of this? About, yeah, Rum?
Yeah, just talk a little bit about validation. How do most men seek validation and how that works?
In the wrong directions. Drone asked, how do men seek validation? I think we seek the validation. We run to the fig leaves. We want to be validated. Is exactly what Jim's saying. I want to be validated by my fig leaves, and not all of them are bad. I want to be recognized as powerful in my company. I want to be recognized as I have money. I got a nice bass boat. I got a nice big truck. I got a nice house. You know, that's what I want to be validated by, rather than the authentic me. Who am I really? And that's where it gets down to the nitty gritty and really dangerous.
I follow that by saying, I'm wired, and I reckon you are too, to look for external solutions to internal problems. Security, ladies and gentlemen, I saw a woman out there somewhere. Security is an inside job. So if you're looking for external things to tell you who you are, to name you even in powerfully good ways, you're looking for an external solution to an internal problem. That's to be mindful. I would encourage you to just ponder a new journey of naming and renaming yourself before other people get to name you, even in healthy ways. Running around with the severed end of an umbilical cord, trying to plug into people, places, or things. Tell me who I am, tell me who I am, tell me who I am. Begin a journey, very gentle with yourself, and say, this is who I am. Yes, sir. Yeah, I do.
Like all of us have something that we struggle with, and try to plug in and when we get quiet and stop, that thing resurfaces, whatever it is. Why don't we ever get complete victory or something so that it's conquered?
Because you have to be killed and go to heaven for that, and that's not a joke. Our words frame our reality, and I don't mind the question at all. Thank you for your vulnerability. I know that struggle. Can I get complete victory over this when, as Teddy Roosevelt said, and then Brene Brown made her whole organization over this, it is not the critic who counts the bystander, but it's the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred with blood and sweat and dirt. He's there. And even if he succeeds or he fails, at least he does it while daring greatly. I learned, because of a panic attack on an airplane I never had before, that's still there at times, that what God was saying to me is, when the anxiety comes up, this is what I call anxiety. Spell the word out. And now Christ, I enthusiastically trust you. That spells anxiety. I made that up for me. So I really don't anymore, to get the anxiety gone or all the depression gone, because every moment of chaos for a man is an opportunity to trust in God. So my brain can go, I want to get rid of all anxiety. That's not going to happen, because there's not a man in this room that doesn't have some death anxiety. You can quote, "O grave, where is thy sting? Death, where is thy victory?" But we're all wired to fear death. FEAR, real quick, can stand for forget everything and run, or FER can stand for face everything and rise. So now I look for the arenas to say, I'm scared. Military guys tell me this. Courage is feel the fear and do it anyhow. But if I wire my brain, I got to get out of here. I'm already out of here. Stay in the battle and say, anxiety, I can deal with you. That's my thought. That's from my journey.
You ask why we can't get rid of them completely, and I just want to back up what Jim's saying here is that it pushes me into God every time. So if I'll get into my silence, then there's no words, there is nothing to say. I am pushed into the nothingness of God himself. Yeah. And I am dependent on that. And there'll be a day when we're so united in the ever after, whatever that's going to look like, who knows, that I will now be so immersed in him that is gone. The other thing is, and you ask, how do men do this? And I want to back up on your invitation on the fish camp, deer camp, Kentucky bourbon camp, whatever they are. It doesn't matter. We're going to spread these all over the country. Is that when men are willing to get naked in front of other men? And I'm not talking about like the statue up here. Transparent and vulnerable. Tell their story and have affirmation. And other men don't run out of the room or treat them in some other way. They have a corrective experience about how to be naked and without shame. And so I back what they were saying about, I've seen that firsthand. I've seen how it works. And that's one of the ways I think it's one of the most powerful experiences for men to do.
Thank you, Eli. Thank you, Jim. Guys, have a great week. And continue to be in prayer for Ron and Jim and Eli and Eva as they lead this intensive retreat these next 3 days. Have a great week. See you next week.